10 bench press mistakes coming at you real fast, as well as how to solve them. Stick around for number 6 because it's a mistake that people very commonly make and very commonly are unaware that they are making. And the solution to error number 10 is a real useful one. Number 1, with the first couple errors here, let's start with some low-hanging fruit, right? Some real easy things to correct. Number 1, the error of not having a focal point, or pretty much equivalently, having a moving focal point. So, for starters, do not stare at the bar. The bar is a moving target. Find a spot up on the ceiling. Stare at that spot on the ceiling at the very beginning. You will note where the bar is in your periphery. Simply keep staring at that spot the entire time and make sure that the bar finishes in the same place in your periphery every single time. Have a focal point and make it an immovable focal point. Number 2, mistakes that people make with their grip. All right, let's start with the width of the grip. You don't want to have a grip that's too narrow. You also don't want to have a grip that's too wide. In general, you're going to take a fairly moderate width grip, usually starting about 1 hand width out from where the knurling starts. Works pretty well for most people. From the bottom, if you're recording yourself, viewed from the 6 o'clock angle, in other words, viewed from somebody standing where your feet are, you want to have vertical forearms as seen from the bottom. So that's going to be a fairly moderate width grip. All right, now as far as how you're going to take your grip, you're going to pronate your grip slightly when you take your grip on the bar. The pronation is simply so that you are supporting the bar over the base of your palms and not up by the pads of your fingertips. So your wrists aren't going to be bent crazy back, in full extension, right? You want to support the bar over the bones of your forearms. So you want to support the bar as much as possible over the base of the hand or in the base of the palm. And then the third error that goes along with this, along with the grip error here, is that of taking a suicide grip. Make sure that you wrap your thumb around the bar. You can do it. Do not take a false grip or a suicide grip. It is named that for a reason. It's real good for allowing the bar to slip out of your hands. You search around long enough on YouTube, actually pretty easy search. I do not recommend it because it's fairly scary looking, but you will find examples of the bar slipping out of people's hands. Don't take a suicide grip. Number 3, errors of stance. Let's talk about width first. Take a roughly squat width stance. That's what you're looking for. It gives you some nice width. Remember, the bench itself does not give you much width. It does not give you much stability. So the width of your stance is really what gives you stability. And to go along with that, you also want to have a flat-footed stance. You can push harder through the floor with flat feet than you can if your heels are up off the ground. That's a power leak if your heels are up off the ground. Number 4, and this is related to stance, is the error of not using your legs when you bench. Now, yes, primarily this is certainly an upper body lift, but you use your lower body for stability. Specifically, you use your legs for stability. So don't lay there just like a soft puddle of mush on the bench, right? You want to drive your feet actively into the floor. In other words, you're kind of driving your feet diagonally, right? Not straight down because you don't want to bridge up off of the bench, but also not straight away from you either. Otherwise, your feet are just going to slide along the floor. So you kind of drive them diagonally into the floor as if you were trying to push yourself up the bench. In other words, towards the uprights of the squat rack or of the bench rack that you're using. Now, of course, you're not going to slide up the bench because the bar is going to do a good job of pinning you to the bench. But driving with your legs will give you stability. It will also support that nice arch that you're looking for when you're benching.
With me, it's here. Without me, here. With me, without me. With me, without me.
Error number 5, and we've alluded to this already, is the error of driving with your legs so that your butt comes up off the bench. Remember, if your hips, even for a moment, leave the bench, the rep does not count. So make sure that you keep your butt on the bench. Your job is to drive up the bench, not up vertically off of the bench. Error number 6, a real important one, not correctly using your shoulders, positioning your shoulders correctly, all right? You want your scapulas, you want your shoulders pulled back behind you. It creates a wider base of support on the bench. It also puts your shoulders in a stronger, safer position from which to bench. You're going to pull your shoulders back. It's kind of back and down, actually, but as long as you pull them back and are driving with your legs, you're going to do a fine job at scapular retraction. A bonus here is that you actually have shorter arms, effectively anyway, when your scapulas are pulled back. And this is not some type of cheating, subtraction of range of motion, right? This is the most productive, stable range of motion. When you bench press without your scapulas retracted, when you bench press with your shoulders forward or your scapulas protracted, that's kind of the equivalent of squatting up on your toes, right? It's unstable. Yeah, it's technically more range of motion, but you don't want to do it. So if you're going to squat flat-footed, you also want to bench with your shoulders pulled back, your scapulas retracted. Number 7, the error of breathing like a buffoon, right? Old 80s, maybe even early 90s stuff, this whole breathe in on the way down, breathe out on the way up. Don't do that. We've got videos that cover this, but you simply want to take a breath in at the start of the movement, hold that breath against a closed glottis. If you're not sure how to do that, just say the word hic and hold the CK sound. So hic, and hold that breath all the way down and all the way back up. If you're doing it correctly, you should be able to do it with an open mouth. You can do it with a closed or an open mouth, but if you're holding your breath against pursed lips or blown out cheeks, blown out lips, that type of thing, it's not this, it should be this. That's how you're holding the breath, all right? So you should be able to do it with an open mouth if you're doing it correctly. You want to hold your breath, tighten your abs down. You're performing what's called a Valsalva maneuver. It is good for stability, and your body knows to do this every time you've ever done something hard. You're pushing against a stuck car or a cardboard box that you're trying to slide across the floor that has a whole bunch of stuff in it. You do it correctly every time. You take a big breath, you hold, you push on it. You do it when you're constipated, all right? So don't do this whole breathing in on the way down, breathing out on the way up. Also, on the bench press, one of the things that you can do is every time in between reps, you can do, this is probably about the only lift where you're ever going to do maybe multiple reps on one breath. You can do that, but don't take it as a test of your manhood or womanhood to see how many reps you can get on one breath, because passing out on the bench press is always a bad idea. But when you do take a new breath, remember that you are lying on your torso, right? So every time you take a real big breath, you're moving everything, and now you've got to pull your shoulder blades back again. So you really, on the bench press, you just kind of want to take a small kind of a topping off breath in between reps. Number 8, the error of having a vertical bar path. On pretty much every single other lift, we try to have a bar path that is as vertical as possible. This is not true, however, on the bench press. You're actually going to touch a point that's a couple inches lower than where your shoulders are. So your arms are not going to be at 90 degrees of abduction. They're going to be somewhere around, like 70 degrees of abduction. This helps reduce any chance of shoulder impingement. And because they're going to be down here, your touch point is going to be a little bit lower than the level of your shoulders. Because of that, you are not going to bench in a perfect vertical path. It's going to be a little diagonal. It's still going to feel mostly vertical, but you're going to have to remind yourself to touch the same point on your chest every single time and drive up and slightly back on the way back up. Number 9, the error of death in the bench press, right? I say that in a somewhat humorous fashion, but seriously, the bench press can be a dangerous lift if done poorly. In fact, it is easily the most dangerous lift performed in the weight room. It is the only one, specifically on the unracking process and on the racking process, where if something goes wrong, your throat, your face, your neck, all that stuff, all the stuff that you need to live are potentially trapped if something should go wrong between a heavy object, the bar, and a very immovable object, the bench.
Okay, this is the problem. Little help? Somebody? Little help? Oh boy. Okay. Stay calm, you got this. Stay calm.
So make sure that you're bench pressing in a safe manner. I would recommend not having collars on the bar. That's always a good start. However, not having collars on the bar, because that does allow you to dump the weight off side to side, that will not prevent you from the type of catastrophic failure that happens during the unracking or the racking process. Something goes wrong, the bar slips or something like that, it falls out, it lands on your throat. Doesn't matter. If it lands on your throat, it does not matter how fast you can dump the weights off side to side. The damage has been done. So the two solutions are, and these are the only two solutions, the two solutions are either have a spotter, which is very useful, always recommend that. So have a spotter to help with the handoff and to help with the racking situation. We've got a video on how to correctly spot the bench. We'll link to that below. Or very commonly, people train on their own. I get that. I typically train on my own. Use safeties. We've got a video on how to set up your safeties, whether these are called safeties or pins or spotter arms if you're on a squat stand like I'm talking with right here, or the crash bars as we sometimes call them, although you shouldn't actually crash into them. But you want to set them at a height that is low enough that you can bench safely and not run into them, but also high enough that should you run into trouble, you can relax everything, you can collapse your arch, you can set the bar on the pins and do kind of the slither of shame out from underneath. Live to bench another day. And number 10, the error of an inefficient unracking process, specifically if you train alone. If you train alone, you don't have somebody helping you with that unrack process, right? So you've got to cover this distance, technically called a moment arm, because the bar does not start off directly above your shoulders. It starts back a little bit of a distance there. So you've got to cover that horizontal distance, and you're in kind of a weak, compromised position when you do this. So as the bench press gets heavier, it becomes difficult to successfully unrack the bar and get it safely and sturdily into position over your shoulders. So what you can do is, we've got a video that covers this more in depth, but for starters, what you're going to do is you're going to use the leverage. Instead of just using the muscles of your shoulders, the muscles of your upper body to do this, you are going to use the leverage provided by your entire body. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your elbows, and the elbows are going to go out and slightly back, slightly out and back. You're going to bridge your hips up off of the bench. Then you're going to unrack the bar. In other words, straighten your elbows and then bring the bar back into position by bringing your hips back down to the bench. So again, that is elbows slightly out and back, hips up off the bench, unrack the bar, and then hips back down on the bench, because of course they have to be back down on the bench before you start to actually bench press. Some of you may have figured out this process on your own. If you haven't, it's real useful. So as always, we hope these tips help you get stronger and live better.